Have you ever played Garten of Banban? It's that one game with the big green guy that everyone makes fun of. Well, what if I told you that Banban wasn't the Euphoric Brothers' first game? This is. Right off the bat, I just want to make it clear that I'm not talking about the game Swallow the Sea, which sounds very similar, and I'm sure the Euphoric Brothers took some inspiration from the name, but Swallow the Blue is something completely different. Though it was released under the Euphoric Brothers name, it was solely developed by Faris, the older of the Euphoric Brothers. Swallow the Blue is interesting. The art style and concept are honestly really cool, but the game is plagued with issues. The movement system, clunky dialogue, and repetitive nature really brings the game down. But we'll get into that in a minute. First, let's dive into the game that is Swallow the Blue. The game begins with our protagonist, Unnamed Man. At least I think he's unnamed. Anyways, our protagonist begins by checking into the Sapphire Hotel, and is greeted by this man known as the owner, who leads you to your room. It's immediately noticeable how strange the movement system is, as one, the tutorial text is wrong, and says that you need to tap A or W to run when it's actually A or D, and you have to mash the A and D keys to run left or right, which is super unintuitive. There's also this gem that says, some objects/buttons will have the required keys needed to press to interact with them. Very descriptive. You'll also notice at the bottom it says press Q to close your eyes. This mechanic is kind of reminiscent of the blinking mechanics in the games SCP Containment Breach and Close Your Eyes. It's more similar to how the mechanic works in Close Your Eyes though, as blinking negates the monster's attacks, rather than acting as an interference. Moving on. Once you're brought to your room, the gameplay loop is explained by the owner. Every day there will be 2 required events that take place, breakfast and the show. Breakfast is every morning after you wake up, where you drink this blue liquid that I at first thought was water, but actually isn't, and is followed by a period where the player is allowed to progress the story in the way that the game wants you to. Once that day's story events are finished, then that's when the show starts, and the show is basically the time where the game gets to dump all the lore on you, and the lore usually has to do with what happened during that day. Oh, and the 2 people who run the show are named Harry and Balls, and their act is called Harry Balls. Just to give you an idea how the humor in these early Euphoric Brothers games was, but Faris was only like 19 when he developed this, so I can't really blame him. But I will anyway. After breakfast, you're free to explore the hotel, but you can't leave, obviously. By the way, you probably don't want to go in the question mark bathroom because there's an intentional crash in there, which I didn't know was intentional on my first playthrough, and I was really confused. Once you head back to your room, this guy named Bob will be there. Bob is our main tutorial on the mechanics, or explain the controls. He explains to you that being late to the breakfast or the show, not clapping or drinking when the other patrons do, or generally acting suspicious will result in a death. And he's the first to tell you that if you find yourself in a deadly situation, you have to close your eyes. To let us know when we're being suspicious, the developer added a suspicion meter, which is this eye that looks left and right at higher speeds the closer you are to a game over, which I actually think is a cool mechanic. I'll give you that one, Faris. He also gives us this list of rules of things we have to do to stay alive, which includes the stuff that I said earlier, but it also includes things like not swimming in the pool, not trusting level 3, and to not look at the staff while in the elevator. I actually appreciate this because it makes gameplay easier later on, even if it's by a small degree. That's basically the end of the first day, so moving on to the second day, we have breakfast, where Bob is missing. Spoiler alert, he's dead! And today's story objective is to explore the rest of level 1, which is the floor where our room is. On level 1, you find this Ammonite named Tom, who tells you that you need to reach level 2, and gives you a keycard to level 2. And he makes sure to tell you to not lose the Hall Man when you're on level 2. We'll figure out what that is later, I guess. During the show, Harry and Balls tell the story of an Ammonite and a cow who opened a hotel that the Ammonite wanted to use to help people. The cow wasn't the biggest fan of that because it thought people were evil and would imprison them if they found out they existed. So it solves this conundrum by imprisoning the Ammonite and taking over the hotel to imprison other people. Because that makes the most sense. This is obviously about Tom and whoever runs the hotel, which isn't the owner. The next day, we venture to level 2, where we have to follow the Hall Man through a series of doors. Hey, remember how Tom told us not to lose him earlier? Yep. And of course, as you can imagine, this sequence is lovely with the keyboard mashing controls. Once you catch up with him, he gives you the level 3 keycard, and then you go on your way. it's really anticlimactic. And the show today isn't very interesting. They just make fun of Bob, and then they warn you by letting you know that you've been snooping around, and then Balls gets strangled. Which is a theme. Balls always suffers a terrible fate at the end of the shows. The next day is probably the worst day. We travel to level 3, where we find someone who's supposed to be our mother, I think, or a manifestation of her. This part sucks. The mist in the air drugs you, and then your controls are jumbled, which wouldn't be terrible if the keys couldn't be jumbled to any key on your keyboard. I spent, no lie, over an hour on this section because I couldn't find the right one key before the mother would kill me. Oh, and the mom is like giant for some reason now, because that makes sense. This part is genuinely the most infuriating part of the game. Once you get past that, you find Bob, I think. I can't tell because all the patrons look the same, and, you know, earlier Bob was dead. But maybe it's a ghost or something. Ghost Bob awards you with the pool key and tells you to not go to the show tonight. And so, heeding his warning, the next day you go straight to the pool and discover a police officer waiting there. You and the officer float across the pool on a couch, and the officer name drops the game before dropping into the pool and turning into one of the patrons. This implies that the blue we've been drinking is actually like a potion that turns people evil and compliant with the hotel's nefarious schemes, which I actually wasn't expecting, despite the name of the game. It's here where we finally meet the cow that was mentioned at the second show, which looks like a giant baby for some reason. The cow kills the owner and then gives you two choices. Either take over the mantle of owner and join his scheme, or reject his proposal and become trapped like Tom forever. Regardless of what you choose, the game rolls credits and ends. Swallow the Blue was a game that I really wanted to surprise me with great gameplay and story, but unfortunately disappointed. The controls are unintuitive and clunky at best. The dialogue is unskippable and painfully slow, and the repetitive nature of each day is just not enjoyable. It's also a little racist at times. Our protagonist, who is shown to be a black man, is called a monkey at one point, and the mom character speaks with that stereotypical quote-unquote auntie-like tone. These could just be coincidences, but I find it really strange either way. Swallow the Blue did something right. It succeeded at creating a creepy and suspenseful atmosphere with mystical and supernatural lore, which is much more than can be said for the first Garten of Banban. Also, the cover art on Steam is really cool. I really like the way that this game looks, just the graphics in general. It looks nothing like the Euphoric Brothers 3D style, and I think that's a plus because this 2D pixely, like almost rotoscoped at times, art style, I think looks really cool, and I wish they incorporated that more into their new stuff. And this dark shot around the table for the cover art is just, wow, superb. I give Swallow the Blue a 4 out of 10. I wasn't a huge fan. Oh, and there's these blue fedoras you can collect, but the payoff isn't worth it at all, so I don't care. That's all from me. See you guys later, goodbye.